It's good that you could be here with us this morning to worship. We have just come through April, a month of easily the biggest event of all time, Easter. And God the Father sent his Son, his perfect, holy Son, Jesus, down to earth, took on our sin on his shoulders, and he took that to the cross to pay for our sin, not with the Canadian dollar, not with the American dollar, not with silver or gold, but something far more precious, his blood, his life. He gave his life for us on the cross to pay for our sin, and not just to pay for our sin to make our way to be with the Father, but he purchased us. He purchased us, and that is a big deal. And so, what does that look like? Last week, Pastor Daniel started a sermon series, and it's all about the good life. And if God has purchased us, and he owns us, if he has purchased us, Pastor Daniel talked about how can we be a good steward with what we have, with our bodies. How can we be a good steward with our bodies? What should we do with our bodies? And what should we not do with our bodies? How can we be using these bodies to glorify God if he has purchased us? Next Sunday, Pastor Murray is going to be speaking to us, and he's going to be talking about if God has purchased us and we are his, then what do we do with our stuff, our finances? How can we be good stewards with what he has given us, and what does that look like? This morning, I want to talk to you about what we do. If God has purchased us and we are his, then what do we do? What does it look like at work? And so I want to start by using myself as an example. And I'm going to use a story, and you're going to see a little bit of sarcasm. Hopefully it comes across as a little bit of humor, not disrespectful or annoying or anything like that. But I'll use myself as an example, and I would like to tell you about, before I was a youth pastor, I've had various different jobs in my past, some for a short time, some for a longer time. But I want to tell you about my very first job. And you may not know that I was a heavy equipment operator, and I loved it. Absolutely loved my job, poured my heart into it, and I enjoyed a lot of being a heavy equipment operator. I have to say that it was one of those situations where it was on-the-job learning. I started off pretty low, had to work my way up. I was paid well. I was probably overpaid at the beginning, because at the beginning I didn't know much about what I was doing, but I was learning as I went. And I had to kind of pick up pointers from the boss, because he's the one in charge. I'm his worker. How does he want it done? I need to learn from him and get better and better. As I got better and better, I took on more responsibility. And I don't know how to say this, except that I think that I actually became one of the best. In my department, in my crew, I'd prefer you don't go tell the other guys that were on my crew. We'll just keep it between us. But I think I was one of the best operators. I was paid well. I don't know, did I mention to you that I was working for my father? If you don't hear anything else this morning, nothing else at all, remember this. There is nothing better, there's no greater thing that you could do than work for your father. I'm going to come back to that later too, because that is what I want you to remember. Nothing better than working for your father. And so, as I mentioned, I was getting paid, and so you're getting a little bit of money for what you're doing in the moment, but when you're working for family, there's also some future benefits too. Like there's some rewards that are coming a little bit later, maybe some inheritance or something. So you're working for long-term reward as well. And that worked out pretty good. But as this hard-working guy, pouring my heart into my job, working for my family, learning to follow instructions, I felt like you might need to know what did it look like for me as a heavy-duty equipment operator. So I phoned up the boss earlier this week and I said, can we have some type of a visual so that the people here this morning would know what I'm talking about? And totally delivered. We got a little bit of a visual for you, so I'm just going to grab it here. This is not a replica. This is the real deal, the actual equipment I was working with. Not that new fancy dangle patina paint job that you guys might be hearing about. This is blood, sweat, and tears. This truck was in good shape when I started, and now it's got many miles on it. This bad boy made trips all over the place. I started off a little bit more in the sand and gravel business. And as I began to learn the requirements of on the job, we were on a dairy farm, and so the boss was more like, Brent, I think if we can transition from hauling sand and gravel to the front of the cows where they eat, we could probably increase herd health and increase milk production if we cut down on the rocks, bring in the silage for the cows to eat, limit the rocks, sand, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you pick up things as you take on more responsibility and you become a better and better employee. It's all about obeying. What the boss wants, you got to learn what he wants. And so instead of feeding the cows rocks all the time, it's a little further haul to go all the way over to the feed room where the silage is, but a good employee does what his boss wants. And I don't know much about all the behind-the-scenes stuff, how to increase herd health or milk production, but that's the boss's business. I just do what I'm told. And I loved it. I enjoyed my job as much as I could, poured myself into it. And I was paid well, probably more than I deserved. So I would like to shift gears a little bit, and I would like you to set aside the idea of what I did for work, and I'd like you to think about what do you do. And I'd like to go through a passage in Colossians with you in chapter 3, and I'd like you to consider, is it possible that this passage in Colossians chapter 3 is for you? I think it's easy for me to talk about a childhood experience when a child is pushing a Tonka truck, feeding the cows with that, and it seems so easy to obey your father. But how's it going for you in your workplace? So let's turn to Colossians chapter 3, and I want to start at about verse 22. Yeah, so in this passage, we'll start at Colossians chapter 3, verse 22. In the very first word, it says slaves. Don't tune out right away. I want to try to tell you that I think there's a lot of stuff in here. It's talking slaves, obey your earthly masters and everything. It's just talked specifically to wives, then to husbands, then to children, then to fathers. Now it's talking about slaves, and I want to tell you that I really believe there's stuff in this passage that applies to you and I. Whether you are working in the trades or whether you're working in the healthcare system, maybe you are a teacher, maybe you have an office job, maybe you're at a computer, maybe you're a stay-at-home parent, maybe you're retired. Kids, some of you, maybe you're in school. I really think that there's a lot of principles in this passage that apply to us. So I'll read through the passage and then we'll go back in a little bit at a time. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there's no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. So, real easy to tune out on the very first word, right? Slaves. It sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with us. That's a very negative connotation. Nowadays, we just don't think that is a good thing. And I want to try to change what you're thinking about this a little bit. Slaves always has this negative thought to it, and I don't think that it always does, but maybe it does these days, but not in all time. Some of your versions in your Bible might say bondservant, and so a slave or a bondservant is simply someone under the command or obligation of another. Someone who's under the command or obligation of another, that's your slave, right? So what about if we use a word that's a little bit more 2023? Somebody who's under the command or obligation of another, maybe it would be an employee. Under somebody who's an employer, boss, supervisor, business owner. So this passage is talking, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Obeying is complying with a command, direction, or request. Submit to the authority of. So God is literally telling us to submit to those in authority over us. So when you're in your workplace, God is simply asking you, submit to the boss. Do what he says. Follow his instructions. Learn what he requires of you, and do that. And I think that's reasonable. It's hard. It's hard to do that. But I think that's exactly what he's asking us to do. Slaves, obey your earthly master in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you to curry their favor. So not just when the boss is looking. It's like, oh, boss is looking, quickly change the way you do things. Say, oh, he's gone now. Do things my own way. To me, that seems like it's speaking to our integrity. Do we only do things the way the boss wants when he's looking? Or we do things the way he wants us to even when he's not looking? How do you act when nobody else is around? When nobody is watching you? What do you do then? I think that speaks to our integrity. What are you doing when nobody else is looking? To curry the favor, that's like being a people pleaser. Trying to do things just right, just when the boss is looking, and then change back to the way you're doing it all the rest of the time. That's not exactly what this passage is talking about. It's talking about doing it consistently, doing a good job all of the time. Not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart. What comes to your mind when you think of sincerity of heart? This is like your most private, pure thoughts or feelings. What's going on in the inside? So when you're at work and you're doing what the boss asks you to, even when he's not looking, what's going on inside? Are you kind of like, bad attitude? Or are you doing it with sincerity? There can be all kinds of different work attitudes. You can kind of be like, I do things my own way. Who cares what the boss wants done? I just do it my own way. He doesn't even know what I'm doing because he's got a different department. Or you might try doing things where you just get away with as little as possible. Or taking breaks when it's not break time. Brought my cell phone up here. How does it feel when a guy just stops in the middle of what he's supposed to be doing and just starts scrolling through his cell phone? I literally did not check the scores from yesterday I see that the Leafs won, but more importantly, the Oilers won. So they both advance, right? Okay, if I wasn't sharing what I was looking at with you, you might be a little annoyed at the fact that I'm just using my cell phone when I should be working, right? It is a little bit hard for me to do that when you're all looking. If I'm in my office, nobody else is around, maybe it's different to pull up my cell phone and just kind of take a break, unscheduled break, whenever I want. That sincerity of heart can be an interesting thing to start pursuing a little bit. How are you doing with your attitude at work? Are you obeying the boss, and are you doing it with sincerity in your heart? Not just when he's looking, but all of the time. And with reverence for the Lord. Is this a new thought? Reverence for the Lord at work? So this speaks to devotion, admiration, respect, even worship. Your workplace. Have you ever thought about taking the Lord into your workplace and it's like worship at work? Is that a new thought? Try that out this week. Try bringing reverence for the Lord in your workplace. That's an interesting thing to bring in. Not just obedience, not just sincere heart, not just when the boss is looking, but even a reverence for the Lord in your workplace. Verse 23, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart. I talked about my little truck, and like a child would, just trucking up and down all over the place, pushing it and bringing loads of silage to the cows. I was working hard, at least as much as a child can. I thought I was doing well. Are you working hard at your workplace? When you work hard, do you bring value where you're at? Do you bring some creativity? Do you increase productivity in whatever way you're supposed to? Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord. Working for the Lord, to me, is a bit of a game changer. To me, that's a game changer because if you're working for someone else, let's say you're working for yourself, it's about a paycheck, it might be for my status, to increase my status so that I'm doing better at my workplace. Or maybe you're thinking you're working for your boss, or you're working for your peers, you want to look good in front of your friends. That's totally different than working for the Lord. If everything you do, you work hard and you work hard for the Lord, that gives you purpose. You don't even have to like your job, but it gives you purpose because you're working for the Lord. I heard a guy say on this topic, it's like when you go to work, you put on your jacket and you might have the name tag accountant on your jacket. And so when you go to work and you're doing your thing at work and you're an accountant, you're working undercover, secret agent, working for the Lord. Nobody else necessarily knows that. You got the accountant jacket on, but you're undercover, secret agent, working for the Lord. What's your job? What's your purpose at that point? You're working hard at everything that you do. You're bringing productivity and creativity and adding value wherever you go. And you're changing the environment around you, making it better like you would want to for the Lord. And what does everybody else see? You're not working for them. You're not trying to impress them. You're working for the Lord to please the Lord, but the work that you do for the Lord that pleases the Lord impresses them. You work for the Lord, impresses them. You're not trying to impress them, but it will impress them, and it creates an environment that is amazing which now starts to open up all kinds of doors for the job that you're really there for. If you are purchased by God and you're in the family of God, what's your job? What's your purpose? Spread the gospel, right? Now all of a sudden you open doors to all kinds of opportunities that you would have never otherwise had, but you're turning heads and people are seeing you've opened up some doors to some opportunities, and now your job is kingdom builder. That's what God's doing. You're trying to spread the gospel, and you're a kingdom builder undercover at work. So, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. The Bible talks about rewards being mansions in heaven, streets of gold, crowns of righteousness, talks about no more pain, no more sorrow, talks about an opportunity to live forever in the presence of God. Those things all sound amazing to me. One thing I don't think this reward is that we're working for, I really don't think that this is heaven. And the reason I don't think that it's heaven is because that eternal life is a gift. It's by grace, through faith, that we are saved, not by works, that no one can boast. So I don't think that this work that you're working towards to gain rewards in inheritance later, I don't think that's heaven, because that's just a gift. I think these rewards are different. I think this is something waiting for us in heaven. Yes, there's going to be benefits right now. There's going to give you purpose and satisfaction. It's going to feel good being a kingdom builder on earth. But I think there's something in heaven that is so vastly different than what we can think about here, because God, as our creator, has made us in a way where we are longing for something. And all the time that we're on earth, we're going to feel like we're longing for something. And when we get to heaven, we're going to be so full, so complete. Our desires will be met. Everything that He's got for us in heaven is going to make us feel fulfilled. And whatever those rewards are, I don't actually know. Maybe if I did more study on the rewards in heaven, I would have a better answer for you this morning. But I don't know what those rewards are. But I am convinced it's going to be amazing. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Next verse, we take a little bit of a turn. It's going to sound a little bit negative, but I think it can be very motivating. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. That can sound a little bit like, ouch. But I think it can be motivating. If God is giving us rewards for all the good things that we do, and we get excited about that, and we're motivated for that, then what about the bad stuff that we do, the negative things that happen? When the boss isn't looking, he doesn't see the negative stuff, right? You can go to work and you can try to look good in front of the boss and he sees all that kind of stuff. But what about when he's not looking? Well, God is different. God sees everything. And I think it can be amazing to think that He's got rewards for all the good things that we do, and it can be incredibly motivating to think about the fact that He repays our wrongs as well. The things that we do when nobody else is looking, the things that we aren't proud of, it can be very motivating. It can be like a little kick in the pants to smarten up, to know that He's not just rewarding the good, He's actually repaying the bad as well. It can be very motivating for us to realize, yes, He sees both. He sees the good stuff, but He also sees the bad stuff. And it's not just hidden from His eyes. I think this verse is connected to the next one. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you have a master in heaven. So we talked about slaves being under the authority of the business owner, the boss, the supervisor, the employer. And so much of the time we've been talking about those who are under, but this verse says, no, those who are above as well. You are also to be accountable. Do what's right. Do what's just. How you treat people, the things you do right and the things you do wrong, maybe when nobody else is in the office, nobody else sees it. Then what happens? God our Father sees those things too, and he holds us accountable to those things. He rewards the good, but he repays the negative as well. So bosses, employers, supervisors, I think this all applies to you as well, and I'm convinced that the principles in this passage are applicable no matter where you're at. If your undercover job is at home, you're a stay-at-home parent. If your job is in the coffee shop because you're retired and it's like 10:30, you got to be at McDonald's in time to meet the guys, that's your workplace, that's where you're undercover, that's where your work takes place. Wherever you are, if you're walking the halls of school, that's your place. That's where this applies. I talked about my truck and that I love to work at it with sincerity of heart. I loved to obey, and I know that there were times when I got a picture in my mind of walking in the winter time from the house to the barn, and my dad was up ahead of me, and I was really small, and my mom was in the house, and she told me this story later, and she watched us, and my dad was up ahead. He probably never saw this, but as a dad, he took his normal steps, and I was a little tyke, and I had to take these giant steps to try to step in the footsteps of my dad. I wanted to try to step in his steps, and I couldn't always step in his steps because mine were a little small. But I think that's the benefit of working for your Father. There's grace, there's some freedom, there's some flexibility, there's forgiveness, and even if you don't get it right every time, when you're working for your Father, it's on-the-job training. He will work with you, and he will help you, and we're talking about our Heavenly Father. I would love to encourage you to consider your workplace. How are you doing? If we have been purchased by God and we are his, how can we be good stewards with what we do wherever we are? So Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as working for the Lord, not for humans. He has purchased us and we are his. I think we should be good stewards.